All right, how's it going, everybody? We are recording. Welcome back to Engineering Major Philosophy Minor. I hope you guys are having a great Friday afternoon. Of course, EMPM is the spot where you can get a working aerospace engineer's opinions on topics pertaining to engineering, philosophy, politics, and various other social issues. Now, in today's video, we are actually going to take a look at this recent video put out from Kamala Harris about equality versus equity. This video, of course, has gotten a ton of attention by a lot of conservative commentators on YouTube, has received a lot of scrutiny. So the purpose of this video, of this viewing or this reaction, is not to just completely scrutinize the video and try and tear it to shreds, but rather what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to examine the video from somewhat of an artistic analysis point of view, a philosophical analysis point of view. And what I'd really like to do is apply the Socratic method to the video and pose some questions, perhaps when we're trying to think through some of the philosophies that are represented in this kind of thought. And as you're going to see, a lot of this is going to have to do with equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. So the second kind of purpose of this is I think that there is somewhat of an issue on the conservative side of things where we always say, well, we want equality of opportunity, but not equality of outcome. And there's kind of an implication that everybody should just understand what equality of opportunity is. And so in this video, I do want to take a minute to submit my own definition of what I think equality of opportunity actually means, something that I wrote. We'll look at some other quotes, and we'll contrast that with equality of outcome. And of course, if you guys have comments about this definition, if you guys want to expand on this definition, go ahead and leave them below. If you want to tell me that I'm completely full of it, also leave that in the comment below. That's no problem. But let's go ahead and get into this kind of artistic and philosophical analysis of Kamala Harris's video of equality versus equity.
So there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests, oh, everyone should get the same amount. The problem with that, not everybody's starting out from the same place. So if we're all getting the same amount, but you started out back there and I started out over here, we could get the same amount, but you're still going to be that far back behind me.
Okay, guys, so we saw about half the video at this point in time, and I have rewinded it back to a point in the video that I think is important to discuss. So in the video, we see that there is a mountain. This is supposed to be a relatively tall mountain. And we see that two ropes kind of manifest themselves out of nowhere and start kind of threading their way down the mountain. And once they get to the base of the mountain, we're presented with these two characters approaching the mountain. One of them is obviously of lighter skin, the other one is obviously of darker skin, and we notice that the ropes stop at a certain point, and the rope is not let down enough for the darker skinned person to have access to it. Now, the darker skinned person is on not a level playing field, and or not a level playing field according to the video, and that's kind of the point, right? It's to show that people have these disadvantages. But I want to point out some other things about the video. Notice how, I know it's kind of hard to see here with the play bar, but notice how the quality of the earth, let's say, between the two is exactly the same. Both of them have access to the mountain. There is a little bit further for one person to climb, that's true, but let's look at some of the other things, some of the other elements in the video that are in the background. There's trees in the background, there's a mountain, a different mountain in the background with a plateau that has a waterfall coming out of it. There's more pathway that actually goes kind of around the base of the mountain. And so I want you guys to take into consideration some of those artistic elements when we start talking about how this relates to equality of outcome. So the video suggests that everyone should get the same amount. Well, in fact, being given the same amount is actually an outcome for people, right? So right off the bat, the video is suggesting equality of outcome. Now let's kind of take the Socratic method approach to this premise that everybody should be given the same amount. That is the active claim, is should. We should give everyone the same amount. Well, let's ask some questions of this claim. Do we think that everybody deserves the same amount? Now, this is a contentious question, right? Because the word deserving is in there, and that implies that perhaps some people don't deserve the same amount. But again, this is just food for thought. Does everyone value the same amounts equally? Should people earn the amounts that they get? Is this type of equality, that being that everyone should get the same amount of something, justifiable morally? Why or why not? So when we talk about the question, does everyone value the same amounts equally, for example, or should people be able to earn the equal amounts that they get? Again, I talked about some of the artistic elements in this video. There's a different mountain that could be climbed. There is an opportunity that perhaps there's something in this extra face, because this person is lowered down, they actually have access to this extra face. Maybe that can be climbed. Maybe the person at the bottom is actually somebody who's a rock climber and can simply just climb up to the rope, right? Maybe the person at the bottom would rather their journey be walking around the mountain rather than climbing to the top, right? We don't all value the same things. We don't all have the same ambitions. Perhaps the person on the bottom says, well, I can't access a rope to climb this mountain, so I'm just going to go try and climb the other mountain in the background. Maybe I want to access the water that's in the mountain in the background. Maybe I want to access the trees up there. So the purpose of these philosophical questions is kind of to offer the thought exercises of thinking about this from a moral point of view. Now, the other aspect of this is a logistical point of view. Now, I pointed out earlier that these two ropes just kind of sprang out of nowhere, right? Well, where do these ropes come from, right? Apparently, in the beginning of the video, there's no one at the top of the mountain. So how do these ropes just magically materialize? So I want to ask now some logistical questions about this section of the video. Where do we get this amount of things that we should be getting? And importantly, get the same amount from whom? When we say get the same amounts, well, amounts of what? Again, we talked about how people have different talents and value different things, and what amount of this do we give if we possibly could get the things? One possible way to rectify this situation is to simply lengthen the other rope, but somebody has to go lengthen the other rope. Does the first person who is able to access the rope, is that the person who should be lengthening the rope? Or should the person below be constructing a rope? So amounts of what and what amount? How do we deliver the same amount? Does everyone produce the same amount? Now, I also want to make reference to the statement that the problem is that we're not all starting off from the same place. Well, starting off from the same place is also technically an outcome. Now, how is that an outcome? Well, it's because there is a world outside of the womb into which we are born into. That world has a specific state of being that we are born into prior to us actually being born. So let's ask some philosophical questions about just kind of the world that these two characters exist in and of the characters themselves existing in the world. Is it true that these are the only two characters that can be in this situation depicted? And what I mean by that is it really always a lighter skinned person that's starting off at a different place than a darker skinned person? What if it was two dark skinned people? A dark skinned person up here and a dark skinned person down there. Is that a situation that arises in the world? I would certainly think so. Is it possible that there is a darker skinned person that can be up here and a lighter skinned person that can be down here? So this goes back to the question of where do we get, or who from do we get the amounts that we give to everyone equally? Let's ask another question. Is it true that there are no appropriate goals or ambitions other than climbing this particular mountain? The video assumes that both these people want to climb or want to accomplish the same thing, that they both value the exact same thing, and therefore they both deserve the exact same thing. Let's ask another interesting question. Is it possible that two people starting off from the same place end up in different places anyway as a result of personal decision or other factors not related to which rope was offered? We see this all the time. Person A starts trying to climb to a certain point, and then person B starts trying to climb to the same point and maybe achieves it or does not achieve it, or maybe even surpasses person A. Is it possible that one person starting off from a lesser place can end up climbing the mountain faster than the person starting off with access to the rope, or in fact just simply overcome the person with the first rope while the person with the first rope decides to stay at one spot in the mountain? Now, if you answered yes to these questions of is it possible that one person starting off from a less place can end up in a better position than somebody starting off with, let's say, more advantages, how did they do it, right? And so this is where I think it's appropriate to lead into the definition of equality of opportunity. So this is something that I wrote. It's by no means perfect. I'm not an amazing writer. I don't claim to be. I'll put the quote up on the screen right now and I'll read it to you guys aloud. This is my idea of what equality of opportunity should be defined as. Equality of opportunity is succinctly the freedom of an individual to pursue means and ends of his own interest uninhibited by similar pursuits by others, and so long as these means and ends do not inhibit others' pursuits. Equality of opportunity does not guarantee equality of circumstance, either advantageous or detrimental. It simply guarantees that an individual has the right to endeavor towards altering circumstance by any exercise of his own reason, imagination, liberty, and talents, restrained only insofar as such exercise does not interfere with his neighbors. So here, as applied to this situation, the light-skinned person may take any approach that they want when presented with this particular situation. They can decide to take up this rope if they want. They can decide to cut down these trees and make a ladder for this other person. They can decide entirely that they just want to go to this other mountain and climb it. Similarly, the darker person has an equal opportunity of whatever goal they wish to pursue. Maybe they want to improve their skills at climbing so that they can climb up to this rope. Maybe they want to try and collaborate with this other person. So this person cuts a piece of a rope and puts it down here for the other person to climb up. Maybe this person puts their hand down and helps this person up, right? Maybe the darker skinned person finds some precious mineral hidden in this rock face right here and does something with that. Completely abandons the goal of the mountain. Maybe the darker person is so ambitious about getting up to this rope that they refuse help from the other person, and they decide to learn how to climb this face, climb up the rope, and they end up in a completely different spot, right? So to kind of add on to this idea of equality of opportunity, I want to read a quote from John Stuart Mill, and I think that this is an incredibly beautiful quote and definitely worth thinking about and pondering. The sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. The only part of the conduct of anyone for which he is amenable to society is that which concerns others. In the part which merely concerns himself, his independence is, of right, absolute. Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. So here John Stuart Mill starts off basically by saying that the only time that you can interfere with the liberty or action of others is self-protection. The only time that power can be used against another member of the community is to essentially embolden the self-protection of another member if they are being attacked or something like that, or if they are being prevented from their equality of opportunity. His own good, meaning perhaps the equality of outcome, is not a sufficient warrant to utilize power against other people. And this is where we get back to some of these important questions of, if everybody is to be given the same amount, if everybody is to start off on the same footing, how do we get these resources? Who do we get these resources from? They surely must come from somewhere. So from who? And what typically happens is power is used against one group that is considered to be above another in order to kind of equalize the playing fields here. And we're going to talk about more on that in a second as we watch more of this video.
It's about giving people the resources and the support they need so that everyone can be on equal footing and then compete on equal footing.
So this is a really important part of the video right here, and I want to talk through what happens here. So we're back here, and the lighter skinned person has climbed up the rope and has reached near the top of the mountain, or the top of the mountain. And the darker skinned person is sitting here and contemplating what has just happened. And the video says we need to be on equal footing, we need to be able to compete on equal footing. Well, how does the video accomplish this artistically? Watch what happens here.
So that everyone can be on equal footing. And
so this is really important. The earth actually must be raised in order to simply access this rope, right? Now, there's something very convenient about this analysis. Notice how the plane, or the level plane, let's call it, the horizon at which the lighter skinned person was standing did not change at all. The mountain did not change at all. We simply moved the earth. So let's apply the Socratic method to this then. Where does the soil come from to raise the earth? Who provides the soil to raise the earth? Why not simply lower the mountain? And who would lower the mountain if that's the solution? What if the person who was behind has the earth raised to that point and then decides not to climb the mountain? Are there situations, and this is a similar question as before, are there situations where people compete on equal footing, start off on equal footing, but still end up in different places along the mountain? A good example of this is sports teams, right? There might be two people who grew up in the same place, went to the same schools, end up on different sports teams, end up playing different positions. Who decides which peak of which mountain we all end at? So one of the reasons I brought up the point that the original playing field of the other person does not get lowered or the mountain doesn't change is because let's think about how Mother Earth has formed the planet, right? Even Mother Earth herself, with all of nature's power and all of nature's glory, did not make the earth completely devoid of mountains and valleys, right? So Earth itself could not create equal footing. Nature itself does not create equal footing. And so to expect that we can simply engineer that is a little bit far-fetched, I would say, especially among creatures as complicated as people, again, with different values, with different interests, with different talents, etc.
And then compete on equal footing. Equitable treatment means we all end up at the same place.
Okay, so that last line is also very important. Equitable treatment means we all end up at the same place. So she's trying to contrast this with equality, which just means we all get the same amount. Of course, the entire premise of the video is that equality and equity are both accomplishable, important philosophical things that we should do, right, in society. But let's ask some questions about this last line. Equitable treatment means we all end up at the same place. Well, the first question is, are you so sure that that can happen? Where is the same place after you have raised the earth? So this goes back to what we were talking about before. You don't notice that the original level spot goes down, and you also don't notice that the mountain goes down. But soil certainly has to come from somewhere. How many different metrics of value do you want to try and engineer around to guarantee that each person ends up in their own individual ideal place? Now, if you start subdividing this, it becomes infinite, right? It becomes untenable. What happens when the ideal place is not ideal anymore? Now, a lot of times, unless you are an extremely high-functioning, hard-working, can stay up unlimited hours and multitask and do everything at the same time, which is a very rare person to come across, your ideal is going to shift, and you are going to sacrifice some of the things that were given to you so that you can pursue a different ideal. So what do you do when the ideal place is not the ideal place anymore, right? And what has happened to the people that sort of brought about the ideal place for mass numbers of people. So I want to bring the discussion back to some of these questions of where do we get the amounts from to make people start off in the same place? Where do we get the soil from to raise the earth? Who do we get this? Who do we get these amounts from? Who creates the things to give? Who provides? Who organizes the distribution? And in thinking about this, I want to play this clip from a Jordan Peterson interview. Now, I think that this clip is extremely important in trying to reason through and answer some of these questions of how do we manage this this giant endeavor, this this Herculean endeavor of making sure that everybody ends up in their ideal place and starts off with their ideal things and has their ideal journey and does all this stuff, right? Because all of these things need to come from somewhere, need to come from someone.
Let's make it once again very clear what you mean, what you are against. So, equality of outcome, ideologues, what exactly is it
Equality of
that
outcome will
you
do.
are... Yeah.
Well, and anything that smacks of Marxism.
So immediately right here, we see Jordan Peterson strongly disagrees with the idea of equality of outcome. And he's going to explain why in a second. But this sort of idea of equality of outcome, as we talked about throughout this video, is exactly what's being advocated for in Kamala Harris's video. So let's go ahead and find out why Jordan Peterson feels this way. And let's also keep in mind, you know, some of these questions that we had before. Where do we get amounts of this? What amounts? What do people value? Do other people value different things? Is it possible that there's another explanation other than, is it possible there's another explanation for some of these differences in outcomes, let's say, than something nefarious?
Yeah, but Marxism, of course, you can also define that in various ways.
No,
Theoretically,
basically
or...
Marxism is the hypothesis that human history is the battleground between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, so that human history is best conceptualized as a continual battle between those who have and those who don't.
But we're now talking within feminism?
Well, it's
So in this particular case, the interviewer says something along the lines of, well, you know, Marxism can be defined in like a bunch of different ways. But Jordan Peterson retorts, no, there's a very specific definition of Marxism. It's this power struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. In this case, economic power is the battleground.
changed into identity politics, so it's just switched from economic power to other forms of power. It's the same damn thing.
So this is an important part right here. There's this kind of switch that happens here where people who are fond of this equality doctrine have simply shifted the terms from economic power to political power or institutional power. Economic power is still built in there, but the main idea being that there is some group of people that has power for some reason, and there is another group of people that doesn't have power for some reason, and the very existence of that power struggle is exactly why the proletariat should overthrow the bourgeoisie.
Okay, so
And the problem with that too is that there's an infinite division of privileges. So one of the things I found out about the Russian Revolution,
Please, Jordan, let's not go into the Russian Revolution, but just...
So the interviewer is trying to avoid going into the Russian Revolution, but in a second we're going to see that the ideas kind of undergirding the Russian Revolution are very important to this discussion and also very important to the equality and equity, equality of outcome discussion generally.
well, it's
What
important
it is
because
within... I know.
you
I
asked
know.
about equity.
Yeah.
Okay, how many identities do you have? Do you think? Let's say 10. Okay, you're an oppressor on at least 2 of them.
That right there is an extremely important point. Now, why does it matter that she's an oppressor on 2 of them? It matters because, as we talked about earlier, in order to accomplish the equity and equality, you need to get soil from somewhere. right? You need to get amounts of things from somewhere to give to somebody else. In Kamala's video, the ropes magically just appear from atop the mountain, but that is not what happens in real life. Somebody makes the ropes, somebody climbs the mountain, and somebody puts the ropes up there.
You're white.
Yeah. And middle class.
Okay.
That's a very interesting thing as well. So what Jordan's basically trying to say is that you are an amalgamation of a bunch of different identity types. And on two of those, you're likely an oppressor. And he says you're white. This goes back to the difference we saw in the video, the fact that, you know, it was probably intentional that they put a darker skinned person down and a lighter skinned person up with advantages, right? And the interviewer responds, and middle class. Now, the tenor in her voice, the way that she says this, makes her think that, well, I'm middle class, so that should clearly negate me being white. You know, I feel like that is kind of the voice she said it in, like, oh, well, you know, I'm not bourgeoisie, you know, I'm middle class. Well, the thing to remember about this is there is always somebody more proletariat than you. And you better believe that the people who are more proletariat than you are going to assume that you're bourgeoisie.
Good, too. So, when the revolution comes, you can have your 8 dimensions of victimization and your 2 dimensions of oppression. And you can bloody well be sure that you'll be punished for the oppression and not rewarded for the victimization.
You can bloody well be sure that you'll be punished for the oppression and not rewarded for the victimization. That perfectly encapsulates what I'm talking about. The interviewer responds, well, I'm middle class, right? Like, doesn't that exempt me in some way? No, it won't. When somebody comes looking for soil, when somebody comes looking for amounts, when somebody comes looking for somebody to cut the top of the mountain off so that it's easier to climb, or to make more rope for people to go down, or to take rope from somebody else and give it to the person who doesn't have less, you better believe they're going to find any one little thing that can be used against you to justify the fact that you will get these things taken from you and given to somebody else. Now, I want to take a second and have you guys brainstorm along with me some of the different identities that have been added to this this philosophically Marxist idea of who is victimized and who is not, right? And we can think of a lot of these that have been added in the last 4 to 8 years. So let's go ahead and start off. Male. Of course, with the girl power movement, we've heard about toxic masculinity, we've heard about the patriarchy, we've heard about all the historical injustices propagated by men against women. Cisgender, racist, sexist, bigoted, homophobic, misogynistic. In some circles, mother is even a reason. A nuclear family member, right? We've heard ideas promulgated that the destruction of the nuclear family is of import for some of the more radical calls, let's say, for equity and justice. You've heard science denier. You've heard Trumpist. Recently, there was an interesting thing that I guess there is a list getting put together of people who supported the president. Now, what that list is going to get used for, whether or not it'll ultimately get used for something, I'm not sure. But of course, it's a list, right? A non-mask wearer, somebody who's anti-lockdown. These are all different things that have been added to the list of social currency, let's say, that you might be lacking in or you might have. And as Jordan Peterson is saying, you can be sure that when the revolution comes, if it does, hopefully it doesn't, but when the revolution comes, you'll get judged on just those things, no matter if you're 1,000 other good things.
And that is what happened in the Russian Revolution. And it's an inevitable consequence of those sorts of policies. Because you can fragment people's identities to the point where you find where they're the oppressor. And as soon as they're the oppressor, even for one reason, then they're the enemy. And if you happen to be the sort of person who enjoys collecting enemies, let's say, and there's plenty of people like that, then one reason that you're the enemy is more than sufficient.
That is such a powerful segment here of this Jordan Peterson interview. I will probably get a copyright strike because I probably let that play for too long without pausing it. One reason is more than sufficient. One reason is more than sufficient for somebody to come in and say, you don't deserve that soil, you don't deserve the top of that mountain. You shall cut down the mountain, you shall move the soil, and you shall give it to somebody else. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the video there. I know that this was a little bit long, and there's a lot of questions to ponder through, and there's a lot of different things to think about. You've got a quote from me that may or may not be garbage. You've got John Stuart Mill with a pretty incredible quote about freedom and opportunity and things like this. And then, of course, you have the Kamala Harris video about equality versus equity, and then the Jordan Peterson clip to go ahead and think about. And the idea of this, again, is not to tear apart the video. That's been happening a lot, and I have been ranting a lot on other stuff. But the point is to just offer up some food for thought for people to really think about when they're contemplating these ideas, and they're contemplating what kind of country they want to be living in, what kind of economic and political philosophies they want to stand behind in kind of the next coming years with whoever is going to end up being president. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and leave a comment below if you think I'm full of it or if you like the video, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.